Hello.
Hey,
Hi.
Pam.
Hi.
So like I say, with the uncertainties and the potential of bad roads and more snow and trying to plow the plow the parking lot, it seemed like a good idea just to make this meeting virtual for now and then have a secondary meeting a little later on, which we'll announce. Well, I'll tell you, it's going to be just before the wetland workshop on the 18th to formalize any decisions that have to be made here, since by regulation we have to make them in person. So before we go, Tracy, do you have any comments on what we're doing?
No, as long as this has been noticed so the public could join. I know that this link has been on your website for each month. And so I feel comfortable that there would be discussions, but really no action items, right? Not even approving last month's minutes or the consent agenda.
Right.
And then what we'll do is I think we should do about 10 days notice. We can get by with 3, but 10 days notice of the January 18th meeting beginning as kind of part of your regular meeting. And I think we should be good.
Okay. All right.
Sounds good. I'll get that notice before the end of the week. So
Yeah, I just figure might as well treat it that it's a 10-day notice instead of the 3.
Okay.
sounds good.
All right, sounds good. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run through the agenda as written and see if there are any questions, explanations that people need at this point without making a decision on that, so that we can get those issues out of the way before the 18th. So the 18th meeting ought to go really, really quickly because we've already gotten everything out of the way. Any questions on the consent agenda to start with? Anyone? I have one question.
Just one,
Yeah.
I have a quick point for the minutes we can maybe fix before then. On page 7, it says the public art cap should be, or was 50,000. And we kind of have 2 caps. We have caps per project and caps for the whole thing. So I think we need to clarify that in the minutes. And then in the page when you do the budget status update, we can, if you could clarify on that, the 2 different numbers.
Sure. Yep. Cap is maybe the wrong word for that. In that place. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll also ask about that from the stewardship program. But okay, anybody, the one question I had is what, couldn't go back and find it. What project did we have with Woodbury for $100,000? It was some kind of rain garden thing, I presume.
Yeah, it was approved earlier this year. I don't have the number in front of me, but it was for their city hall project. They installed tree trenches. Yep.
Okay, I kind of vaguely remembered, and when big numbers come on here, they kind of jump out at me and I wonder what they are.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions about the consent agenda? Permit or anything? Okay, we'll move on to the permit program. Any comments or questions on the permit program? So far, so good.
I
Okay,
was just gonna say, if I get to my right page here. Okay. It looked like there were more non-compliant inspection reports, and so the percentage of inspections found non-compliant was higher too. So my question, Nicole, was this because you found out more because you had Mary helping you, or were there other reasons for it being higher than the past couple of years?
We haven't figured out a reason, but that's something that we've discussed. We kind of noticed kind of throughout the season, like, I don't know if it's just general apathy everywhere, or if all the costs of erosion control went so far up that, but we did remark on that to ourselves during the inspection season, like what is going on? And we did have increase in non-compliance. A lot of that was on publicly owned sites. And so, you know, maybe it's something we need to work with our public partners some more. It depends on like the city, whether or not they have really full-time inspection staff. A lot of them are doing like building inspections and not necessarily focused on erosion control, but we have made improvements over the years with like Ramsey County, for instance, who has changed something in their contracts that they can hold off on pay items until the contractor gets back into compliance. But yeah, I don't unfortunately have a great answer for you. It's something that Mary and I talked about. Like it was a dry year. So thankfully, you know, there weren't as many environmental impacts, but we did notice just kind of like an apathy towards erosion control, and it was kind of odd. So I'm still trying to figure that out with her.
Well, maybe if it's a lot of the publicly owned sites, you can break it down, and if there's several out of one, and then I think it would be good to proactively work with them to remind them. I kind of wonder, kind of the same lines, that everybody's having such trouble getting good help these days.
Yeah,
that might have been some of the contractors' issues too. But thanks.
And a lot of times, like, yeah, the success of a project as a whole is really really falls on who the superintendent is and whether or not they care. And you know, it could have just been like sort of an unlucky year getting a bunch of folks running these sites that really didn't want to put any effort into that. But yeah, something we'll definitely be talking about this upcoming year. And if the trend continues, talking about changes that can be made.
I was interested in what, could you remind me, Nicole, what would change the non-compliant into a violation? Just to remind me, because it did look like the violations were lower, so maybe the number of verbal or proactive things.
Yeah, so a non-compliant report would receive a letter C grade or lower, so either letter C, D, or F. And sometimes a report could have like a minor violation on it because it's technically not compliant, but the site as a whole remains compliant because it's just like a small maintenance item that they need to fix or something like that. What that tells me is that there were fewer violations, but they were a little more egregious, where it you know, resulted in a discharge of sediment off the site or things like that. And then the surety deductions being less lets me know that despite having more non-compliant reports, there is a less or a lower amount of escrow deductions, which leads me to think that it was more on public projects because we don't hold escrow for public projects. So, but yeah, so to answer your question in a roundabout way, a report could have a violation on it, but not be considered non-compliant, as like the site's not considered non-compliant as a whole, or a report could have multiple violations or a particularly bad one violation, and it would send the site into non-compliance. So that answers
My
that.
dogs. It does answer the question. If my dogs behave, I will ask one follow-on too.
My dog has great timing too. I'm surprised she's not barking currently.
Sorry. On the variances approved, could you help me understand that one a bit more? It says newly reported 2022. I couldn't remember what that meant in regards to the variance approved. Could you help me with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, permits come in and it's noted on the bottom of the cover sheet whether or not an applicant's requesting a variance, and it's typically pulled from consent agenda so that we can talk about what the variance is. I know that there was a lot of attention given to that Excel Energy project this year with the wetland buffer impacts, and a thought that like something had been said like, well, are we just, you know, losing all this buffer over and over? And so it wasn't requested of me, but I just thought I'd dig back and look at the number of variances requests or approved by the board in the last 3 years. And so this past year, 2022, it was 5 variances. Only one of those variances was a permanent impact to a wetland buffer. So
Yeah,
I
I was really surprised at the 1135 number. Honestly, I was just like, oh, maybe you did some digging and figured out what the average was or the trend was. That's kind of what I was curious about.
yeah.
So that helps. Makes me curious what occurred in 2020. I don't remember.
Well,
So,
yeah, I'd have to look back at each particular one, but we did have more permit applications than average. It's creeping back up again in 22, but I would say 40 is pretty high for what we've seen. So that would statistically probably push the variances up a little bit, but yeah, I'd have to look back at exactly what those were.
no need. I was curious. I can poke around too. It just the trend was all over the place.
Yeah, I just looked at this year, exactly which variances they were. And it was four approvals of temporary wetland buffer impacts and 1 approval of a permanent impact, which was that Excel Energy project.
Okay, any other comments? Okay. Moving on to the stewardship grant program. Any comments from anyone? I had, Diane made a comment about handling public art. And Paige, you may want to think about how we deal with these things on here. Because public art has a maximum of $50,000 for the year. The street sweeping we agreed was $128,000. But it says it's allocated, but it doesn't come out of the funds. So somehow I'd like to see how we can reflect that in this table to kind of keep track of where we are with it. Do we, I don't know, that's kind of a question. The 128,000 is indicated as allocated, but it's not taken out of the. See what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know if Tina can help, but I guess I'm confused. So this is how we typically do it. If, once funds are allocated, we put them on the table like this, even if they haven't been removed from our budget yet. Like a lot of the 2022 projects that we allocated for won't be, or not a lot, but a few of them won't be paid until this year.
I know,
I don't know.
I'll jump in here because I was trying to play around with this table a little bit before I put it in the packet. And I wanted to show that, we're specifically looking to spend that $128,000 on enhanced street sweeping. I think we can add a column for when the board approves distribution of those funds so that you can see how much of that has been distributed or planned to be distributed based on approvals. So I think we can add another column here for that.
Okay, that would be a help. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood you, Larry. So I think it kind of goes with Diane's comment about the public art, which I have a draft going. So I'll send that over to Tina to see if that works for both of your kind of questions on that.
Yep. Okay.
Do you think you'll be spending every penny of the street sweeping?
I would imagine.
Yeah, I imagine it too, but it's not gonna all come out at once, right?
No, well, I don't know. Street sweeping could, depends on the timing.
Yeah, it depends on how this, so so they typically do their street sweeping at the same time, right? And so I would anticipate that we would take it out. Yeah, we haven't, gotten that far along yet to see how we have a meeting with the cities coming up. So then we'll figure out kind of how we're gonna do this, but I'm not sure at this point.
Okay. I understand it's still under development. I just wanted to
Yeah.
sure it was reflected properly in the totals and that we didn't get overspent someplace along the line. Okay. Now we have some sort of action items, but they're coming up in 10. Attorney report, anything to report, Tracy?
I can report that we received the contract documents from Miller Excavating, hot off the press as recent as the last document came in about 4 o'clock today.
Okay,
But it looks like they're all approved. They look good. Insurance requirements well exceeded what we typically require. So it looks like they're going to be able to proceed. So Larry, I think they're going to want you to sign the notice to proceed. And I think that might get issued then January 9th or next Monday.
okay, all right. That sounds good.
So good.
The board issues policies and operations. There have been a couple of things added to the board log from our last meeting. And this kind of brings us to the end. Is there anybody that has anything they want to take off or they want to add to the action log? Excuse me. Something that's come up that you think we ought to deal with, basically, is that's for.
Where are we keeping track of the land acquisition policy?
Which,
The land
I saw that.
acquisition.
I saw that in the administrator report. Is where I thought it was.
Yeah, I do have a note of that status in the administrator's report.
Right, because, and I appreciate that, but just something that is in every week or every month, I mean, so it's either in a project or it's in the board action log.
I can add it to the board action log since it would be a policy that the board would be acting on. It's ongoing, so that's why I left it in my administrator's report instead of, and I know I left out the ongoing projects last month, but otherwise it has been in my administrator's report monthly.
and do we have
And
any?
that was sorry, Larry. I was going to say that was a couple of months ago. I had asked the question trying to clarify. I think there's two things that are directly going to influence the board. It's that policy, the land acquisition policy. I agree with what Diane said. The other one I'm interested in is the roles and responsibilities. And I thought we had kind of highlighted that we were going to put both of those into the administration report. Just want to be consistent because I think both of those are things that I know from a board standpoint, we're all really interested in. So wherever it goes, I remember seeing them there normally. I missed it last month.
Yeah.
It wasn't there.
Yeah, I think we had decided to keep them in admin because they were ongoing items that weren't being saved for another time, like these items, have a plan for another time, but I'm open to other ways of doing that.
That's
And
fine.
Diane,
That's fine.
I was going to ask though, Diane, you're interested in the end goal when we do a review of it? Is that correct? That's the action you want tracked?
Well, on that particular subject, we had two issues. One was we decided we better have a policy before we got to the other subject, which should we have any interest in the property that's available. So there's two parts.
And I sent out a little article from the Star Tribune about the pond Battle Creek. So
Yeah.
it's apparently still ongoing. Have we had any more feedback on that?
No, just the continued feedback that no matter what happens with that property, there is a shared interest in maintaining and preserving the current buffer and wetland areas. So that certainly is a shared interest of Ramsey County and us. But the purchase of that property or the discussion of the purchase of that property or conservation easements hasn't happened at this point, no.
Because it sounds like there's a lot of activity going on, both on the commercial side, which they seem to want, and on the environmental side, which we and others seem to want. So hopefully we're actively engaged. Do we have somebody actively engaged with them?
Yeah, that would be me. Yeah, so I've been,
Okay.
yep, I've been talking with the county staff person and the Ramsey County Soil and Water Conservation Division leader and White Eagle as well.
Yep.
So
Okay,
she's
good.
been kind of my go-to in between that.
Okay. All right. Well, good. We don't want to let a good opportunity slip away if we can. All righty. Any other, the other item that I had on here was adopt the drain incentives. At the last meeting, we did talk about this a little bit, about looking at, in addition to street sweeping, looking at enhancing or finding a way to enhance the street sweep or excuse me, adopted drain incentives.
Mhm.
Put that on our list, or is the CAC going to handle that, or does anybody else have any input or ideas on that?
So as a first step, Paige and Sage and I were planning to meet. I think it was a snowstorm
Yeah.
that canceled our last meeting time, but we do have plans to meet. I don't know, Paige, if you've had conversations with Sage about it, but
Yeah, just briefly with Sage and Lauren to talk about, what's going on. And we have the annual report that we got from, I think Hamlin puts that out for the adopted drain program in our district. And then talking with Lauren briefly about communication campaigns. So that's about where we are now. So we can look to schedule a meeting with Tina soon.
and then we can bring that back to the board with some ideas, but it could go on the action log. I think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
If you'd like.
Is that a decision, Tracy, to add it to the action log? Can we get by with that? Well, Tracy.
Oh, there she is.
Okay, yes, for the action items next meeting or on the 18th, you're saying, Larry?
Yeah,
wants
can we add something to the action log as a result of this meeting, or?
It's guidance to staff. It's not
Yeah,
an
yeah.
action. It's a,
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Tina and I talked about this kind of being very workshop light. And a lot of times at a workshop, right, the whole goal of that is to give staff direction on what to do next on a certain topic. So I'm really fine with that.
Right, okay, good. Let's add that in there then.
Yep.
Good, excellent, thank you.
Mhm.
Now we get to item number 10, which is new reports and presentations, or as we like to call it, the Brandon Show.
yes, I will just turn it right over to Brandon to jump right in.
All right. Let me share this. Go presentation. Hopefully everyone can see the presentation mode.
Yep, it's good.
Yep.
Excellent. All right, so there's a few presentations here under item 10 on the agenda. The first one is an update on several flood risk reduction studies that we've been working on this year. And so in order to organize my thoughts, I've taken a number of figures out of the memos and reorganized them in PowerPoint just to try to work through the memorandums and that are included in the packet a little bit more efficiently. I only have one figure in the slides that is not included in the memorandum, and that's the location figure here. Pam, I remember you providing that guidance. Make sure we start with a location figure, and I didn't have a good location figure in any of the memos. So this is a screenshot from the resiliency study web map. So you can kind of see where these three flood risk reduction studies are located. The first one is the Phelan Village, and that's the number one there. This is just north of Lake Phelan. The second study is Ames Lake, and that's the number two. That's just south of Lake Phelan. And then number three is the County Ditch 17 improvements. This is at number three in the overview. That's going to be just to the northeast of Wakefield Lake. So the order of these studies that I have them listed here really just follows the order in the packet. And so I'll work through them in that way. There's no real relationship, interconnection here between these three studies. So the first one is Phelan Village. And this was an area just north of Lake Phelan, and the model updates and the resiliency study had identified 3 habitable structures that were within the 100-year floodplain. And so those are the pink symbols on the screen there. The light blue shading is the 100-year inundation extents, and I'm qualifying that in the slide here as the pre-feasibility 100-year inundation extents, because the first task that we do is, with any of these feasibility studies, is a data collection review. We take a closer look at the sites here. And one of the things that we did, one of the first things we did was reach out to Maplewood and make sure we had a good understanding of what their storm sewer network was and information in the site. And one of the things that popped up was the culvert coming out of the west wetland. That's let's see if my laser pointer will work here. When we talked with Maplewood, we had this culvert showed up when we reached out for data, and that was something new. We hadn't identified that before. And so one of the first things we did was update the model with the new information. What we found was that lowered the elevation from the west wetland, and it really removed these 2 habitable structures from the floodplain. So as we proceeded through the feasibility study, we were focusing on alternatives to mitigate flood risk within this area here, which we're calling the east wetland. Yes.
Out of curiosity on that discovered culvert, is that city owned? Do you have a sense on who owned that culvert, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I believe that is city owned. It showed up as a public culvert. It's underneath the trail. The yellow lines that are shown here is the GIS data set that we got from the city. So that's where it does fall under their ownership. As part of the study, we did walk out there to make sure that it had been maintained, there wasn't debris, it was functioning as intended, and it was clear. There was no vegetation, debris, it was free flowing. So it is being maintained, even if the documentation and the data for it wasn't readily available in electronic form.
And for the future, seeing as how we're dependent on that one, removing those habitable structures from the floodplain, which is definitely a positive, is that going to go into our inspection tool as well and get put into our database for future years? Or would that particular structure not fall within our realm of inspection?
I think that for this particular structure, because it's city owned, that would fall under their responsibility to be inspecting and maintaining their infrastructure, similar to any other small development pond outlet structure, if you will. Those are ones where it would be an example of an infrastructure like that. If it plugs, there could be risk to structures, but district doesn't take on that responsibility to go and inspect all of the city outlets. So I would put this culvert in a similar category.
Why they added this culvert?
Why did they add it?
Yeah.
I don't know the history of why they added it. It very well could have been to reduce flood risk. I don't know the history there. It's we identified it when we took a closer look at, or when we re-requested information. This came through. What we're finding, just cities and communities in general over the last several years have really put an emphasis on updating their GIS files, both in terms of identifying locations for pipes, but then also in the attributes, documenting inverts, diameters, and that sort of thing. And so we, as part of these studies, we find that connecting back with our city, with member cities to get that information, even if we've only received, their data set a couple of years ago, it's good to reconnect with them, understand what new information they've changed to make sure our models are reflecting that best available data.
And just to be honest, Brandon, the reason my ears perked up on that new culvert future information, it'd be nice in future reports just to say, look, we learned something new in this particular thing. I just reread the section again, and now that I've heard your talk, I can conclude that from reading the section. When I first read it, I was like, oh, you just updated GIS data, and maybe we either got something wrong or there was something slightly different. It wasn't clear to me what it was, but this talk was helpful. I just didn't gather that from the report.
That's a good comment. We can be more explicit about that. Absolutely.
Or at least substantial big ones like this one. I get now. It helps explain my set of questions that I was about to ask. Why West is okay now.
Absolutely. All right. So then we were focusing on the outlet and alternatives for this east wetland. And there's 5 different alternatives presented in the memo here for the purposes of say efficiency here. I'm going to highlight a couple of them just to illustrate some of the site constraints considerations that we worked through as we were discussing these different options with the city of Maplewood. And so the first one here, both alternatives 1 and 2 follow a similar alignment. And so the existing outlet from this wetland is a pipe that runs between 2 residential homes, and it runs very close to the 2 homes. So it's a small diameter pipe that then outlets into Lake Phelan. And that pipe is undersized. It's a pipe it's an outlet that the city had done work on several years ago and had worked on that, likely to increase the capacity based on TP40. When Atlas 14 was published, more rainfall data. And so then this is an example of where when Atlas 14 was published, existing storm sewer infrastructure became undersized. So we looked at a couple of options to increase the capacity of that outlet. One was replacing it with a larger pipe, additional capacity. That would involve significant disturbance for the residential property, both next to the homes, but also through the backyards. We also looked at an option where we only put a pipe in partway through their backyard and then did a swale. Again, trying to really minimize the excavation that would be needed to install storm sewer through there. And when we talked about these options with city staff, there was a couple of things that popped up. One was realizing that there would be a significant amount of disturbance to these habitable structures. 2, there's shallow depth for the storm sewer, so it really limited the opportunity for how large of a pipe we could put in, what that additional capacity was. And 3, from a maintenance perspective, in order for the city to access this, they would have to go through residential property, close to those homes, to make sure that the pipe is clean, functioning as intended. And so these 2 were kind of discarded for those particular reasons. Alternatives 3 and 4 here looked at modifications to the storm sewer system. This is a section of street where the city has a street improvement project here in 2024. And so I understand that the city's planning to reconstruct these streets. And so that's a great opportunity to change the storm sewer system, increase the pipe diameter, and do that in a way that's partnering with another project to minimize disturbance in the area. So alternative 3 looked at modifications to the storm sewer, where the current storm sewer routes up and into the wetland. This would take the stormwater here and divert it south and bring it into Lake Phelan. This alternative 3 by itself doesn't solve the flooding problem here. It reduces risk, but it doesn't completely get rid of the issue we're trying to address. Similarly, we looked at a different outlet. So this is a new storm sewer here on East Shore Drive, where here a new storm sewer system down, and then another outlet into Lake. This was an interesting one. This street is also included in the city's street improvement project. This is an interesting one because you could put in a larger diameter pipe and address the flood risk down here. You could also put in a smaller diameter pipe along this alignment and do that in combination with alternative 3. And so that's what alternative 5 is. And so you could do both of those, and then that would also address the flood risk for that particular structure. And so for those, we were talking through costs and different options with the city. Paige and I met with city staff multiple times throughout this process. And one of the things that we started talking with city staff as we start looking at alternatives 3, 4, and 5, in particular, those storm sewer revisions, really modifying the city's drainage system. So it starts to feel like a project that is pretty typical for what cities do in combination or at the coordination same time with their street improvement projects. And so one of the things we were talking with the city about is where the district involvement would be versus what parts of a project would really fall under the city's role and responsibility as part of their street improvement project. And so that's the reason why there's a couple of different columns for project cost here. The planning level project to cost, we pulled together looking at what would, if the watershed district were to go and do this project, kind of a standalone project, what types of costs would we be looking at here? The second column is looking at it and going, well, that we know that the city has got a project in place that they're planning on for 2024. We're going to help the city understand regional drainage within this area, provide guidance, input a couple of options for modifications they could consider for their storm sewer system, but let them take the lead in selecting the option that they want to implement, that they want to maintain, that would still achieve the goals of the project for mitigating flood risk. And then the watershed portion of the project could be the outfalls to Lake Phelan, the bank, perhaps bank improvements, restoration along Lake Phelan. That would start to feel more like a project that the watershed district would take the role on or take the lead on. And so that's the reason why there's the second column when the costs are considerably lower in the column on the right. And then with all of these costs for the feasibility study, there's a lot of unknowns that are here. There's things that come up during final design. And so in order to account for those unknowns, we give a range in costs. And so that's the graphic on the right here, where on the x-axis, it's the percent of design that we've completed so far. So as we move towards final design, we start moving to the right towards 100%. And so we're somewhere around 10% for design. And so based on that design, we're showing costs that are plus 40, minus 20%. You can see how as more and more design gets completed, that uncertainty gets less because we've got greater definition on the project. So that's the background there for why we're showing those ranges. For this one, kind of next steps as we're thinking next steps here. This is a great opportunity to partner, collaborate with Maplewood. They do have a 2024 street improvement project, and the city's schedule for their project. They complete their feasibility studies in the summer, fall of the prior year. And so they're gearing up to complete their feasibility study this summer. So as part of that feasibility study, that's when they'll come back to the district and ask questions related to the calculations and the analysis that we did as part of our feasibility study. And they'll eventually then end up selecting improvements that mitigate risk, flood risk within the area, but again, align with goals and findings that the city uncovers as when they complete their feasibility study. So, looking forward here, construction of a project then would all happen under one one package where we get rolled up into the city street improvement project. That's when the storm sewer modifications would get made, and the additional outfalls, if that's what the city chooses to proceed with, additional outfalls into Lake Phalen would be constructed. So these improvements were a little bit ahead here of the city, which is a good place to be when they're going into their study. But if you're looking ahead towards construction on this one, that's tentatively slated for the 2024 construction season. That's the overview on Phalen Village, and maybe I'll pause here to see if there's questions, comments on that one. Paige, I see you turned your camera on too. You were part of these discussions, so if there's anything I missed and you'd like to chime in, please go ahead and do so.
Brandon, I had a question about why the east wetland house wasn't surveyed.
So when we went to collect survey data, we sent requests when we went to survey low openings and low adjacent grades for residential properties, we sent letters requesting permission to access private property to collect that survey information. In some cases, we received approval saying, yes, come, we give you permission to access the property, collect the survey data you need, and then we proceed to use it in the study. In other cases, we were told, no, don't, we don't want you to access the property, and so we didn't. And then in other cases, we didn't receive any confirmation. And so unless we received a positive, yes, you have permission to come onto our property to collect survey data, we didn't access private property. And so this would be an example of a property where we didn't receive that permission. And so in those instances, we used LiDAR information, publicly available data sets, in order to estimate the low adjacent grade relative to those homes. What we did do in discussions with the city, though, although we didn't have survey data, we did talk with city staff about known flooding areas. And this was an area that city staff did comment and did confirm that they've had discussions with property owners and were aware that it was a flood prone area. So although we don't have detailed survey data, we did try to do our due diligence with talking with the cities and then using best available data that we had as part of the study.
I think getting that information from the city is really helpful, but we're talking about one house. And I want to make clear, I like the number 5 option. I think going ahead at this point, though, is premature. I think you need survey data. So I think a stepped up notice to the house homeowners, which maybe Tracy could help draft. And if they decline permission, then I don't know that we should put any money into it. We should just send them some legal notice that they're on their own.
Yeah, that absolutely, that's a good comment. That could be an option, and that's something that the city will have to consider as part of their feasibility study too. In addition to the flood risk that is present for this area, the city has other considerations for selecting or for implementing storm sewer modifications. The one that jumps out to me is the one in alternative 4, and that's also included in alternative 5. Moving that outlet to a location where they don't have to drive through private property, through the driveways, immediately adjacent to the homes to inspect the pipe. That provides some benefit to the city. So what I'm saying is, even if they don't get it, and I'm with you that I think we should.
Well, it's really a question of who pays for the work, right?
Yeah.
So if the city wants it done, and even without a survey, they can pay for it.
Sure.
If we're going to pay for it, we've seen LiDAR be off granted small amounts, but we're regulating with these changes, small amounts of surface water in the storms too. So I'm just saying,
Yep.
when it gets to an action item, I would change it from working on getting the modifications plan to getting their survey done and then taking whatever actions appropriate after that.
Sure, yep. Yep, no, that understood, that's reasonable.
I had one question too, Brandon.
Yeah.
In this, do you ever consider adding active pumping? In other words, putting a pump like we have up in Crestview or we've looked in other places. I know the desire is to have passive because you don't have to do anything, but would will be a potential alternative?
So you're right that, well, a couple of things. One, for this particular location, we did not look at an active system, a pumping of sorts. And the reason for that, the primary reason in this case is, you're also right, Larry, is that it introduces a more of a maintenance burden. Responsibility in this case would be for the city to maintain that. And so first, and kind of the first option we looked for, could this be solved with a passive option? And that's where we kind of came through those alternatives 4 and 5. And once we found that there, that's where we stopped. So we didn't explore a pumped option with the city further after we identified a passive option that could be feasible for them.
Okay. Okay, any comments? Okay, this book in general good to everybody? Is everybody reasonably satisfied with the report? In that case, we'll put together a motion for the next meeting. Moving right along.
Hey, just out of curiosity though, because I had following up on what Diane said, I also like option 5, but was the city engaged in a way that if they had to cover the whole expense, they'd be open for that? That's kind of what I thought I had heard you said, Brandon, but I just wanted to explicitly ask.
Yeah, no, thanks, Val. The last discussion that Paige and I had with the city was, we talked to them that both, alternatives 3 through 5, those are modifications to the city storm sewer system. And so as such, those are projects that the city would typically fund as part of their street improvement project, where our role has been and they may ask for input, is helping them understand these regional drainage patterns and how changes to their storm sewer system will change flood risk in the wetland. So the modifications to the storm sewer system would be ones that the city would take and lead. And that's where we don't recommend a specific one here in this memo, because we want to make sure we're leaving the door open for the city to also complete their feasibility study. And then once that information is available, they would have the ability to select the option that fits with their needs and addresses the flood risk here. So yeah, it is something that, based on our last conversation, we understand that they would proceed with. But because they haven't completed their study, I don't know which one that will best fit within their goals.
Thank you.
The second study here is Ames Lake. This one, it started as a kind of a feasibility study, but I'm going to refer to it as a pre-feasibility study because it has a little bit of a different feel to it. In this area, there are 44 habitable structures that are within the 100-year floodplain. There's another 13 that are very close to the floodplain. So this is one of the areas of higher concentration of flood-prone structures within the district. The tasks that we had within the study are on the left there. And as we got into this tasks 2 and 3 quickly merged together. What we found was that this is a very developed area, and so it became kind of tricky to find space that was large enough to accommodate a regional flood risk mitigation project. And so we had several conversations with St. Paul staff from various departments, with Housing and Redevelopment Authority, really a number of property owners to try to find a place where there could be a potential for. And what ended up happening was we really completed a screening where we were identifying open sites. Could be vacant parcels, it could be parks, it could be public housing where there was a property owner with some green space that was willing to work with us. And so we identified kind of 11 of the highest potential parcels, and then with those had discussions with property owners to identify constraints. Constraints ended up being a really large number of things. It could be existing utilities, shallow groundwater. There could be existing buildings on site. There were a number of parks that were identified where future programming needs or plans for the parks kind of precluded opportunities for flood risk reduction projects. There were sites that just the drainage area wasn't there. We couldn't get enough volume to the site in order to reduce flood levels in Ames Lake that to achieve the reductions that we were trying to achieve. And so as we were going through the screening process, parcels started to fall out, and we classified those as the ones where there were really a lot of constraints. The obstacles seemed like they would be quite great to overcome. Those were identified as red. Those are the lower priority ones. We identified one in and around Ames Lake where there's some interest, but it seemed unlikely. In Ames Lake in particular, there's a trail system there. It's highly utilized. It's a good amenity to the public. And so disturbance of that area, we were really unsure about. The other ones that are there that are kind of hatched are areas where there's opportunities for a local project. There can be drainage improvements that could really be a benefit to the community, but there's not enough area to get the regional reductions that we were trying to achieve. The Roosevelt Homes one maybe is a good example where there's a really willing property owner, and that parcel is actually part of the targeted retrofits program. So there's opportunities to make improvements to that area, but for the purposes of lowering water levels in Ames Lake, that just didn't quite fit. We did find 2 parcels, and those are the ones in green that they're both owned by the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. They're both located within the 100-year floodplain, which makes development on those parcels a real issue, a hurdle for them to overcome. And they were very willing to work with the watershed on a feasibility study for these parcels that would both reduce flood risk reduction within the area, but also provide an amenity improvements for the community here in general. So it was really exciting to talk with them and have them come forward as a willing partner and wanting to take a closer look at what could be done for these sites. In parallel here with these conversations, we were going through and evaluating kind of concept level modifications. We wanted to make sure that we wanted to have a reasonable level of confidence here as we started this next level of study and next level of detail. There was something here that could be done to lower flood risk if we were limited to just these parcels here. And so the parcels are kind of show up here outlined. Those are the 2 parcels. And modifications would be a combination of storm sewer improvements, additional storage volume to store runoff, and then also be drainage improvements, controlling overflows essentially into the development just to the west of Ames Lake, and then backflow preventers to make sure water's moving in the right direction through the storm sewer system. In terms of next steps then from this one, we would be to look at concepts that are specific to these two parcels for reducing flood risk within this area. And that would be really a detailed feasibility study that would take more of a flavor, a feel for what you're maybe used to seeing here. And that would be, we would do that in coordination with the property owner to understand what could be done for those two parcels. That would be planned for 2023. And as part of that, then you would have a scope summary to look at before we get started with that next step for these two parcels specifically. Pause there for Ames Lake to see if there's comments, questions regarding the next steps or conversations that we've had as part of the search for sites in this area.
Just a clarification, the site-specific modifications, I didn't know what that was. It looked like in the attachments, it was things like berm or culvert or sandbags. Is that right?
That's going to be for the County Ditch 17. That's our next one.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
That's our next one.
Yep.
I have a question on these, especially with so reading it. I think you guys evaluated a lot of great local solutions, and you did a lot of footwork on figuring it out. I like all of that. I started trying to think about, if I step back and look at a bigger picture, are there other conveyance points north or higher up that would help reduce those structures where we don't have to have so many site-specific type of projects? Did you consider any of that, or is it really just because of where this is located and in the low areas, they just store water after a 100-year flood? Yeah. I was trying to think, is there another point? I think you did the right work. I just was curious about if you had evaluated beyond just the Ames Lake area.
Yep, it's a really good question. I'm going to go back a slide to illustrate the answer here. The two parcels that we're focusing on we identified were the ones in green here. And in general, this is flood prone area. We don't have the DEM turned on, but when you look at the terrain overall, this area is a topographic depression. Clearly, because there's inundation there, but just more generally, water tends to drain to this area as a low spot. And as we were identifying these sites, one of the things we started looking at was what size of a project would be needed in order to lower flood levels in and around the Ames Lake area. And what we find is that as you start to move away from that area of concern, the storage volume that would be needed becomes greater. It becomes less efficient to put that storage volume further up in the watershed. You have less area that's captured by that storage volume, so it's a less efficient use. And so the fact that we had a willing property owner that was right in the vicinity of where we're trying to reduce flood risk was really exciting. It's a wonderful opportunity to see what can be done there for them, because it could result in something that's really beneficial for this area and this part of the community, but it's also a really efficient way to address flood risk in this area as well.
Thank you, Brandon.
So for that one, again, there's a scope summary that will come, and that will describe in detail kind of those tasks that we'll walk through. The third one here, this is the County Ditch 17 improvements. And so the area that we're looking at is the number of, or the homes. This is Frost Avenue, Wakefield Lake. This area here, there's a number of homes there. And then there's also 3 homes that were just north of. This feasibility study followed steps that were similar to the Phelan Village study. And so the first thing we started out with was data collection review. And similar to the Phelan Village, we went and we collected utility data. We got new information on the storm sewer system from the city. And with this one in particular, we added a lot of detail to the stormwater model, more detail than what is incorporated in some of the other areas. And so one of the things to look at here is the watershed divides. This is pre-feasibility study, are shown in the lime green in this figure 1 in the memo. I'm going to jump ahead here to, this is figure 3 in the memo, but now that you can see the sub-watershed divides are in the light blue. And there's a number of divides that are added in here. And what that additional detail allowed for was a more accurate representation of the ponding, the inundation, the depressions that happened in the backyards. And when we added that in, we found that there were a number of homes here northeast of Wakefield Lake where water levels were really close to the home still, but they were not, the homes weren't within the floodplain anymore. So they weren't identified as being flood prone. So the number of structures that we were chasing here, we're trying to mitigate, dropped to the 4 red ones that are shown in the figure 3. And similar to the Phelan Village, we had several meetings with Maplewood and talked through a number of different concepts here. We looked at combinations of increasing conveyance capacity from upstream of Frost Avenue into Wakefield Lake. What we found was increasing the conveyance alone just results in increases in the 100-year floodplain. So that wouldn't meet our rules. So we had to combine conveyance modifications with a storage component here in the area. And so we looked at a couple of different storage options. One was increasing the storage volume essentially in the ditch north of Frost Avenue. This is on private property. It's difficult to access, so it would be quite the disturbance to property owners within the area. The volume of storage that would be needed is also going to result in a fairly costly project, and you see those costs in the memo. We also looked further upstream and looked at, there's an open area here just to the west of White Bear Avenue. So we looked at providing storage up there. This is an area that is easier to access, maybe easier to construct storage in that area. But there's an acquisition cost that would be needed there for that property. And that would then has an impact on the overall project cost. So we looked at a couple of combinations of conveyance and storage volume. Because the floodplain was close to the structures, you can see it kind of encroaches here on the backs of these 3 homes. We also looked at either site-specific modifications or emergency response. The difference there is a site-specific modification is more of a permanent modification. Think of like a berm or grading, something that would be in place and property owners wouldn't have to, place it prior to a flood event. Whereas emergency response measures are sandbags that would have to be placed and then removed. And so in areas like this, really it comes down to coordination with individual property owners. And in some cases, one of these may be more feasible than another. And in other instances, property owners just may not be interested. And so what we've done here is there are attachments that show both options, both site-specific modifications and a concept for emergency response measures. And we talked about that with the city. Now, historically, the watershed district has provided this information to cities, and then the cities have kind of taken the lead on coordinating, reaching out to property owners. And so we talked about that process when we met with the city. And one of the things that the city said was that, you know, they understand that process and they'd be willing to be involved in those discussions, but they asked that watershed district essentially support them in having those conversations. And so that would be the next steps for this area, would be reaching out to those property owners, showing them the floodplain relative to their homes, showing them concepts for both site-specific modifications and emergency response measures, and then understanding whether or not that's something that they would be interested in pursuing further. And again, until we talk with the property owners, we don't know if that's something that they would be interested in here. So what I have here is, again, the alternative 4. This was what we had talked through with city staff and kind of identified as that next step. And then for comparison purposes here, it's kind of the costs for the different alternatives. Certainly understanding there's certainly a significant difference when you start talking about comparing regional storm sewer drainage modifications to maybe something where a project where we're looking at specifically at one or a few parcels. So that's the big driver and the cost difference in that summary table. Pause there if there are questions or comments related to the County Ditch 17 study.
Yeah, when we talk to these property owners, first of all, are they aware that they have a flood risk?
It varies. You know, some property owners are very aware of what the flood risk is, and other property owners aren't aware at all. And so for these particular property owners, we haven't had a sit down with them to say, you know, to show them these maps. So I don't know how aware that these particular property owners are relative to the risk on their property.
Second of all, is the city, when you have these meetings, do they discuss the issue of flood insurance?
I think that is something that, you know, you want to make that is part of these conversations. Absolutely. You want to make sure that property owners understand what the risk is on their property, and then you want to make sure that they have the resources, or at least the links to those resources to make those decisions. Now, because the cities are floodplain administrators, we usually, you know, they're the ones that typically lead those discussions, and that's where I kind of talk about how we coordinate with them to inform them of what the flood risk is on these properties, and then coordinate with them on how that's communicated if they ask for our involvement.
I had a bunch of questions on County Ditch 17 too. Larry, did you have more? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt
No,
your train of thought.
Go ahead.
I personally am not a huge fan of alternative for a variety of reasons. I think the one that really got to me was when you think about creating a burn or doing 7,000 something sandbags. I mean, that's just going to be such a difficult thing to do in an emergency response that I can't even fathom. I mean, we did just a few hundred at our neighborhood, and it took the neighborhood coming together to be able to do it. Yeah. And then I look at thinking about a berm, and for that particular situation, maybe it's not created in this way, but there's at least one house there that clearly has a trampoline in the back, and I think about kids playing soccer in the backyard, and how that would just really change that house. And so I'm when I think about, I look at the cost, I look at some of the different options that you were considering, and I appreciate the configurations. What wasn't clear to me was it looked like in all of those, there could stand to benefit creating a pond west of that White Bear Avenue area. And it didn't stand out to me how much that in itself would cost versus, you know, some of the street modifications or some of the other things. Is that the 1.9 million, or is that also including the dredge? I was trying to just tease that out in my head.
Yeah, that's alternative 3 that you're describing there. So there's alternative 3 is primarily the pond west of White Bear Avenue. There's, I want to say, minor changes that we could make without disturbing Frost Avenue to the outlet structure that conveys water into the storm sewer system. So from north of Frost Avenue into the storm sewer system, there's some minor storm sewer modifications we can make without disturbing the street that are included in alternative 3 there. But essentially the option you're describing there, Val, is that 1.9 million.
Okay, that didn't stand out to me. I'm sorry, Brandon. I thought that had a couple other things tied to it, but okay. I mean, the next steps would be theoretically to talk to these homeowners about the different options, right? Is that correct? And so, I mean, will we, and 1,000 sandbags doesn't sound awesome. That's where I'm at. I don't know. If I was a homeowner, that would be a very difficult pill for me to swallow.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the alignment that we've drawn there, you can see it in the figures, pulls it out away from the homes, right? So for the, you know, those, as you start having those conversations, if that's something that they're interested in, you start refining that where you're restricting it to around window wells, around sliding glass doors, around low openings. But you don't want to go there without having the conversations with the homeowners and having a little bit better understanding of what the structure is that you're trying to, you know, place this around. And so that's what's shown there is a conservative number, a conservatively high number from a material standpoint, from a level of effort standpoint. That's the point to start the conversation. And until you have that conversation with homeowners, then you can learn of whether or not that's a conversation that continues. You know, it's something that they're interested in. But, you know, as you pointed out too, Val, some of these, you know, there's trampolines, there's uses there that a berm or some of the, you know, would impact. And so it's possible that they say, thank you for the information, we're not interested in that. And that's okay, but that informs the next step as well.
Outside of the cost, and are there other drivers that are in your conversations with the city pushing us toward alternative 4? You know, I read the stuff, but the reports don't always capture all the conversation that happens when you guys are negotiating with the cities. It's just like, do they think the impact to Frost Boulevard is just so astronomically high we shouldn't do it, or no?
Well, I mean, this would be a number that, you know, so think about this here. Frost Avenue was recently reconstructed within the last, I think it's few years. So it's a new roadway. There were state aid funds, but there was cost share that went into that project. And so if that road was disturbed, that would trigger, you know, additional costs. But that's getting at the cost side of it. There's some utility impacts that are involved here, not something that couldn't be overcome. But the reason for looking at storm sewer on Frost Avenue and bringing that west and then into Wakefield Lake was looking for options that wouldn't go through people's backyards.
Yeah.
You know, if you go diagonal following that existing storm sewer route, you're going through dozens and dozens of people's backyards. And so we didn't look at that option, didn't look at that. We did look at options where we didn't do any storm sewer. We were just looking for what benefits could storage in and of itself provide. And we didn't identify any that would provide the reduction in flood levels at that location that we were trying to achieve to remove those 4 homes. That would be any more cost effective than the options there that are shown.
Thank you, Brandon.
Is there any history of flooding on these houses, Brandon?
The one, I think furthest to the south, there's been, I think the city was aware that there had been some drainage concerns. There's not that I'm aware of that there's been flood damage to the homes. Not that I'm aware of.
So what's the next step now to discuss this with Maplewood or wherever?
Yeah, so this next step would be to, again, we pass this information to Maplewood. They would reach out, we would schedule a time to communicate with these property owners, share the information, and then learn if there's an interest in further exploring either emergency response, formalizing an emergency response plan, or further exploring modifications to these specific parcels or the site-specific modifications. Or if they say, thanks for the information, but we're okay, that's an option too. But it would be having that conversation with the property owner to inform them of the flood risk at their property.
All right.
Brandon, when these conversations take place, you say the city leads the conversation with the homeowner? Or are you or somebody else from BAR there?
It's different. I see Tracy jumping on here. I'm curious if you want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to segue into her with the next my question.
Mhm.
The reason I'm asking is what kind of documentation do you have of the conversation with the homeowner? Because obviously there's liability issues all around the place.
And I don't know if that's directed to me, Diane, but at some point, I don't know what causes the flood, right? So whether we have liability because of what exists, but the liability might come from what we do or don't do, right? So, on every real estate transfer, right, they have to look to see if it's in a floodplain, and if they they have to have a required insurance. So these homeowners, if they are in something like that, they will have had some notice based on that. And then I don't know if they've had actual flooding to put them on notice. So, I think at some point, I don't know that the conversation itself is what to worry about. It's that if in fact we think that something needs to be done and we've determined that, then the issue is what we do to respond to the information we know. And whether we as a district have that liability or the cities do, I think that's the other option. But I think our role is just to identify the issue, say ways that we think it can be solved, but I don't think we have to take on the responsibility of actually solving them.
No, I agree with that. I was just hoping that there's some kind of documentation that those issues were presented to them by us. And that's what I was wondering about.
Sure. Wouldn't it make sense that there's a pamphlet or a finding or recommendations or something that gets handed to them as they have that conversation? I don't know, Tina, have you thought about that?
Yeah, I was just thinking that we probably would follow up with a letter that just outlined that either from us or from the city or jointly, that just outlined the information that was shared and the outcome of the meeting, I guess. Yeah.
Our little history, which is a while ago, is all around Tanner's Lake. And we had this real issue about, I think we bought a home, right? And we did different things, but we had this real plan around this home to say, you have some real risk, but it was for us we planned on putting like a wall that impacted their view of the lake. And they said, we're willing to take the risk. We don't want this wall that we can't see the lake for. So, I think it's, really a bonus to them that we're doing this work to try to protect their structure. But after that, you know, if they can make an informed decision too on whether they want it or don't want it at some point.
And when you look at FEMA insurance, flood insurance, are these people considered to be in the floodplain? Because it isn't always clear to me whether our definition of the floodplain is the same as FEMA's definition.
And I don't know who you're asking, but I know as a title company, when we do those searches, we hire someone that checks it, looks it to see if it is or not. And then because the lender is going to require that with every mortgage. So whether these are or not, I don't know, but I do know that's how it's checked from a title company perspective.
I will let Brandon, oh yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Not all of the areas that we identify as flood prone are shown on the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. So FEMA has a list of criteria that they follow in order for an area to show up on the maps. And many times our modeling captures flood risk at a smaller scale than what FEMA will map. Now, we did complete and we did submit our models. This was last year. We did complete a project where we submitted all of that and all of our information to the DNR so that the DNR could reference that information when FEMA updated their flood maps. And so we've shared all of that, all of the information we have, but not everything that we have will show up on the FEMA flood maps. It does show up. We have created maps of all of the areas we've identified as flood prone and have shared that with the cities though. So we have shared the information that we have in these areas that we have identified.
I can tell you from personal experience, getting flood insurance without some of those extra checks is extremely difficult and expensive.
Yeah, and I can also tell you some of these conversations might be hard with a homeowner in that now that they've been put on notice, when they go to sell, do they have to disclose this? You know, it becomes another issue of their responsibility once this is known. But I guess at some point that's going to be the responsibility. This is what we know. You know, whether you pass it on or not, it's going to be your decision, but could have some liability if you do know this and sell it without disclosing it.
I just really like Tina's idea of a follow-up letter because everybody doesn't pay attention to those details at the time of closing. And as you pointed out, Brandon, there's kind of different definitions sometimes and they change and the models change. So I think we just, out of a low-tech letter, we get some good coverage and education, which is what's important. And most importantly, helping the homeowner to make an informed decision about what kind of risk they're willing to take.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Great idea.
I think we should work on a template for that. Obviously, it's going to be important that we have something for a lot of our different areas. So we can work on a template and talk with Tracy about that and kind of get something buttoned up and talk with the city to the different cities as we're working with them. Might look a little different.
Yeah, be my pleasure.
All righty, any other comments on County Ditch 17? Okay. Now we move to Lake Emily.
Okay, I am trying to figure out how to get my controls back. I am going to jump back to the.
Yeah, that is one challenge of this remote stuff is there's things happen to your computers.
Do you want me to stop your sharing so you can
That would be wonderful.
find your stuff? There, try that. That help?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. I'm going to jump back to the packet here. I don't have slides pulled together here, but I can walk you through the memo that's in the packet. Find my spot. All right. So this is essentially a 30% design summary for this was the feasibility was completed in 2016. And as part of the scope summary there were 2 locations where there were concept plans that were advanced to a 30% level of 30% design. One was along Vivian Avenue. That's a filtration basin that's located in a city-owned parcel. This option or this location treats runoff prior to it discharging into Lake Judy first, and then it discharges into Lake Emily, which is the water body that we're trying to achieve or treat. The cost summary here, this is the dollars per pound removal was a little bit on the higher end, and it was also treating runoff that got to Lake Emily through another water body. The second BMP was an underground filtration chamber. And this one would treat runoff that directly flows into the lake. And so what we found here is that underground chamber is the one that we're recommending proceed with, that had a higher removal efficient or total removal efficiency in terms of pounds per phosphorus. It had a lower dollars per pound of phosphorus removed. You can see the prioritization total scores there. I won't walk through all of them. We're recommending just the underground one would be advanced at this point in time. The other site, it's a good site. It's a project that at a future date, if you want to do something with it, it's an opportunity. But because both of these projects would be in series, essentially you're treating the same water twice, the better essentially bang for the buck, the more efficient project is the underground filter. If you authorize proceeding with final design, essentially we would prepare a 75% level. That percentage is, I believe, requested by the city. That would provide an opportunity for district and staff to review, and would also go to city council. We anticipate that we'd come back to you in April, so later this spring, with request for bidding that project. And it could if you authorize that, then it could be constructed as early as this summer. So because we're starting from that 30% design level, this one could advance quicker and be constructed this construction season. Pause there. Any comments, questions related to this one? I realize we're not voting, we're not approving anything, so I won't ask. But if there are questions, we can go through those.
I have just, and this could be for offline, Brandon, maybe. Just tell me if other people know it. I wasn't around in 2016. I'm not certain why CC17 wasn't picked for the Abergass Street auction. I assume it was part of an optimization that sand would just perform better, but I was hoping you might have just a quick summary on why that versus crushed sand versus the crushed limestone.
That particular one, I may have to circle back with you on that one. Well, I do know.
I just want to learn.
Yeah, I do know, talking with the team, that the iron enhanced sand for this one went through quite a rigorous series of calcs on this one to make sure that the water stayed oxygenated, DO levels stayed high, and that it would dry out. So they took a pretty close look at the iron enhanced sand for this one. But regarding that difference, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I did a few Google searches and it didn't just jump out at me on why one was superior than another. So I was hoping you could educate me. But yeah, afterwards it's fine. Brandon.
Any other comments? We will, so look at authorizing that at the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Okay, the last one here under item 10. This is a scope summary for the double driveway pond and Fish Creek tributary improvements. So this is the pond that the Department of Agriculture is requiring Bailey Nurseries to clean out. And so this scope summary looks for additional improvements to the pond and also to the creek tributary to the pond that could be implemented at the time of or following Bailey Nurseries required maintenance, but required sediment removal from the pond. So the scope summary really includes an erosion inventory of the creek, documenting where the banks are failing, coordination with the property owners to make sure we have permission to access for the project, design of improvements to the pond itself. So this is looking at after Bailey Nurseries understands what that minimum they have to do. It's looking for if there are enhanced plantings or things that can be done around the pond to improve that. It's doing a detailed survey for the tributary, and then final designs for the creek stabilization upstream of the ponds are the 4 tasks that would be included as part of this project. Comments, questions related to this one?
I have a couple questions. So I found it notable that you mentioned that there's an assumption that no EAW is required. Is there a risk for the EAW? Is that the reason it was highlighted? And if there is a risk of a need for an EAW, what does that do to the project?
I think the risk, the EAW part of it is related to the material that's being removed from the pond. And so I think there that would be something that would happen under the Bailey Nursery project. Certainly if there's an EAW that's required for other parts of the project, that would extend the project schedule. And that would be another permitting hurdle that would have to be met in order for this improvements to be constructed.
So it's just a cost and timeline driver if something was like that. Okay. And then the follow-on question for as you guys progress through your experiments, I believe I read that this area has been dredged periodically in the past. I was wondering if these changes would help reduce the amount spent on dredging in the future. If that's something that we could show or look into or help build support for some of these changes. You probably already have it on your radar, but I was curious.
Yeah, that's the driver for the bank stabilization, right? As those banks fail, that's a large sediment load that comes into the pond and then triggers that periodic dredging. And so stabilizing those banks, addressing that upstream should reduce the frequency at which that future dredging is needed.
On programs that we work on, we're like, oh, we scope like 30% reduction in this or something to that. When I read through it, I was like, oh, this is a great sale, but we didn't really like put a number out there. I figure we won't, because it depends on how the bank stabilization goes. But I was curious if it just eliminated dredge or if it's less frequent, and is that meaningful to anybody besides us? So I'm trying to figure it out. Like the city doesn't pay, we pay for the dredging. Is that correct? Maybe I'll look at Tina. Do you know if do we pay for the dredging, or does the city for the?
Yeah, that's the project. That's the pond that we dredge as part of our maintenance.
Dredge. Yeah, so it helps us save money.
Or we remove sediment. Yeah, we don't always dredge it. We just remove sediment from the outlets, but.
Cool. Or saving money.
So you want the board to approve the funds to move forward on this?
Yeah, at the next meeting, typically with scope summaries, the funds have already been allocated through our budgeting process, but the board would give a stamp of approval to move forward. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Good marathon, Brandon.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Good. All right, any other comments? Okay, any questions about the administrator's report?
Just wanted to make a note that I put a lot of the upcoming meetings and dates on the calendar for the first half of the year. So you can see all those. I also wanted to let you know that the Metro Mod had been previously organized and coordinated by Mark Donay at Capital Region Watershed District. He was looking for someone else to take that on, and Laura Jester, who is the administrator for Bassett Creek Watershed Management Organization, asked if I would team up with her and team coordinate those meetings. So I have agreed to do that. There's 4 meetings a year for Metro Mod. Between Laura and I don't think it'll add that much on my plate. But I wanted to let you know that's something I'll be helping coordinate moving forward.
We also have to get some officers too while they're at it.
At Metro Mod?
Yeah,
Yeah, yep, that'll be on the agenda for the meeting that's in 2 weeks.
because Mary Texter also bailed out, which she did a great job, but that's okay.
Yeah, they'll be looking for a chair for that, if anyone's interested in being chair. Larry, I know you've attended Metro Mod. I don't know if any of the other board members have attended any of those meetings, but
Yeah, like I say, it'll be kind of interesting to see with Emily not being there, how that presentation goes.
yeah, yep, Jan will be there, the new executive director, so.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay, so. And West Vadnais boundary change is moving along when you
Yep.
say being completed by the end of January. What's completed by the end of January?
Everything should be to Bowser and they should be off and running with it.
Okay. Do we have to go back to Vadnais Heights City Council, which by the way is totally new?
Yeah, totally new council. No, I think we're good. So according to city staff, we're good on their end, is what they've said.
Okay, good, because I looked at Vadnais Heights again and they got a new mayor, they got new city council members. It's like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
walk into the room and you don't know anybody.
right. Yep.
Okay, all right. Okay, any other comments on the, we got it all on one side of one page this time.
Yeah, yep.
Any comments on the project and program status?
I had 3. For project C, I was curious if there was any interaction with ditch 17 in that particular program. Well, so in the program statement, it says the historic high flows to County Route 617. I was curious if any of the choices that we're about to make to invest and investigate further in the earlier project summaries would impact C. What I was curious about.
Sorry, did you say B as in boy or C as?
C as in C, and I'm not good with my call signs. The Coleman Creek Wakefield Lake Diversion Feasibility Study.
Yes, okay. So with that one, with that project, what we had been looking at was making sure that we were looking at sizing ponds, providing storage within Goodrich to not increase flows into County Ditch 17. So those teams have been in coordination with each other as those two studies are progressing. So I guess that's the summary there.
Yeah,
Is that
I was curious about making sure that they're communicating back and forth. I was curious if we pick one of the alternatives to continue investing in, does that change assumptions that the other team's making? Is what I was trying to figure out in my head.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I keep going, Larry, or do you have questions?
Oh, go ahead.
This is G. I'm sorry, I wrote down the letter this time instead of the title. It's the
Washington Basin, North Star Estates.
Sorry about that. I will do better next time in my own notes. I'll write down the title. You're going through the land acquisition strategy work in this particular project. One of the options could be land acquisition. I'm curious if the considerations in that area are being integrated into the land acquisition strategy and some of the policies that you're considering. Maybe this is a question for Tina. It seems like it could be a good example to tie in and maybe set some policy.
Yeah, there's, I think as you look at the land acquisition policy, as we kind of go down that road, you'll see that there's different reasons, right, for the acquisition, and that there might be different paths we take based on that, on those decisions. Yeah. So flood risk reduction might have a different set of qualifications around land acquisition than natural habitat restoration or preservation of land, I guess. But.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to highlight this from a talk for discussion, maybe in the future as we look at that, is it might be an interesting way to pilot anything that comes out of the policy, especially depending on what we see as needs and improvements in that area. So it seems like there's a nice little connection or maybe potential trial in the future in this particular project if the land policy shapes up in a nice way.
Yep, good comment.
And then M is the Woodbury Target retrofit. Maybe I misread this one, and that's my mistake. But were those meant to be shared with the board? It said that they had finished, I think, in January, but were they finished in December? But
yeah, no, we haven't seen those yet. So I think Bar still has those. I have a meeting with them, next week, I believe.
Yeah, that should probably say staff on that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's going to, that makes sense. It's going to staff next. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So that'll be my update. And then we'll see I don't know if it'll be ready in February, but hopefully more of an update in February.
Done, Larry.
Okay. I just had a comment on Bill Bartozzi and Matt Deneau's memo. That's really pretty exciting. I enjoyed reading that, and that's quite an achievement that you have. So thank you, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Appreciate the opportunity to get that data out and do a project like this, and I think it'll be a real benefit to the watershed and the restoration discipline as a whole. So really appreciate it.
Yep, that was good. Thank you. Okay, any other comments on these? Okay, we talked about the board action log, and that pretty much takes us through everything. So
Yeah.
We'll prepare a couple of motions for the presentations that Brandon made, and get ready for a fairly short meeting on the 18th before we have our watershed workshop.
Yeah, I'll plan to put together a packet of information that will include those motions, as well as the minutes and bill list and the permit again. And I'll also have any information we have for the workshop included in that as well.
Okay, so you're gonna put together the motions?
Yeah, I can put together the motions in the packet form, like a action item would
Okay.
have.
Okay, all right, that sounds fair. And then we'll get a separate packet for the workshop to kind of guide us through what we're going to do with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. Any
Do you think, Tina, you'll have kind of the minutes from this meeting ready? Because what I'm concerned about, we didn't have anybody appear for public comment, but at the next meeting, we want to make sure they have the opportunity. And if they can see what was discussed here, they'll
Yep.
know at least they could insert before there's a motion made without any discussion.
Yes, I definitely can have the draft minutes by then, so we'll do that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of wondered about that too.
Yeah.
If that's no other comments, we're done. Pam, are you up at your cabin?
No, my husband went for me, so I'm actually just in my kitchen.
Oh, gee, okay.
No, I'm very happy to be in my kitchen.
I was gonna say.
And didn't have to drive through the snow to the cabin and plow it.
Good for him. You owe him big time.
He's getting some big points for this one, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, thank you, everybody. And
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay.
Right.
bye
Have a good
now.
night.